Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, August 6th, day 670 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me again this week.
Hi, Amanda.
According to leaked reports, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will likely declare a new war goal of conquering the entire Gaza Strip by the end of this week. Israel currently has operational control of some 75% of the Strip, so we'll hear what it means to take 100% and where the new operations could take place. As Israel has agreed to allow truckloads into the Gaza Strip for commercial sale, we're hearing reports that 9 out of 10 aid trucks are looted. And we'll learn about the Hasmonean Brigade, the first company of troops from the newly minted Haredi Brigade. All this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. Yesterday, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with senior security officials to hammer out Gaza war plans and reportedly came out in favor of the military taking control of the entire enclave, even if it means that the remaining hostages could be harmed or executed by Hamas. The meeting was reportedly aimed at finalizing the plan to present to a broader cabinet session, which reportedly is set for 6 p.m. tomorrow. So there's still no official announcement, but Manny, let's game this out a little bit. And currently, the IDF controls 75% of the Strip. So what does it mean, first of all, to control 75% of the territory?
Well, in the territory that the army is in control of, and this is both where soldiers are physically present and also operational control, where the army has capabilities to preserve the area and strike if needed. It's an area where there are no civilians, or maybe very few civilians. And when we're hearing reports about Netanyahu wanting to go for the 100%, and the word that's being thrown around in a lot of these reports is kibush, which basically means occupation, we're not just talking about the control or the conquering of the territory. We're also talking about the occupation of the people in that territory. And should the army go for this move, and should Netanyahu order it, then we will see the army take control of the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza as well. What exactly that entails is a very good question, and I don't know if I can even answer that now because we don't know what's actually being discussed. But right now, the area that the army controls does not have any civilians, and Israel's not responsible for any of the civilians right now in Gaza, in terms of soldiers being, in control of their daily lives.
In the meantime, ahead of this potential offensive, the only model we have, or the most recent model we have, is the Gideon's Chariots operation, which apparently just ended. It launched in May, and in all, 48 IDF soldiers were killed in Gaza since the launch of the Gideon's Chariots, mostly by explosive devices planted by Hamas in buildings and tunnels or detonated against armored vehicles. You wrote an analysis of the Gideon's Chariot. So let's break down this operation and think about it in terms of what it could mean for 100% of the Strip. So let's talk about it. What were the stated goals in May by Defense Minister Israel Katz?
So if you go back to May and take a look at the reporting back then, what Katz was saying and what other Israeli officials were saying, talk about political officials, not the army, was that Gideon's Chariots would be conquering Gaza, which was the word that was used, retaining the territory, meaning staying there. The other goals were moving the Palestinian civilian population to the south of Gaza, targeting Hamas and preventing it from taking control of humanitarian aid supplies. And the ultimate objective of Gideon's Chariots was the defeat of Hamas and the release of all the hostages. That was quotes used by Katz, by Netanyahu in statements that were sent to reporters. That was the goal. And unfortunately, we can say that none of these have actually been achieved. The IDF has actually been withdrawing troops from Gaza in recent days because they're not doing anything else in the Strip right now. since late June, Chief of Staff Zamir has been warning political officials that we've reached the lines that were determined for this operation. It was sort of later clarified that it wouldn't be conquering all of Gaza, but 75% of the Strip, which is what the army achieved. And that's about the only achievement that there has been. If you look at sort of where the civilian population in Gaza is, they're all in the same areas. There's still 1 million civilians in Gaza City. There's 300 plus 400,000 or so in central Gaza. There's around 600,000 in the south, but they've remained there the whole time.
And the goal was to move them all to the south, to the Mawasi area, which had been labeled at some points during this very, very long war as a humanitarian or safe zone, correct?
That's correct, and even sort of during the operation, we had talks about a new humanitarian city in the Rafah area as well. None of that happened, and I think a very sort of glaring issue with the whole operation was as well that Israel sought to prevent Hamas from taking control of the humanitarian aid, and to do this, the whole Gaza Humanitarian Foundation scheme was launched with these distribution sites, mostly in South Gaza, where again, most of the civilians aren't in South Gaza, they're mostly in Gaza City and Central Gaza. And Israel limited the supplies entering in any other way through the regular UN method of distributing trucks. I mean, we can say that this was a failure because Israel has since backtracked and gone back to distributing aid through the regular method and the airdrops, where there's no way of ensuring that civilians actually get this food and aid. Israel even says that Hamas takes control of the aid this way. And we've gone back to essentially that method. So preventing Hamas from taking control of the humanitarian aid supplies as a goal was not achieved at all, since Israel's now backtracked because of all the reports of the crisis in Gaza and reports of starvation.
Let's talk about how many fighters are left from Hamas, and we'll return to the issue of humanitarian aid in a minute. But if we're talking about the decimation of Hamas, where does it stand right now? We, of course, heard that one brigade of 3 or 4 fighters was finally defeated over the weekend. But where are the fighters throughout the whole Strip? How does it stand now?
The IDF has a bit of a problem where in the areas that it's operated in, it has defeated Hamas. And I would say so even very well in some areas like Bet Hanun, where there's basically no Hamas fighters left there. And in Rafah as well. Hamas has been completely defeated in Rafah over a year ago. The big issue the army has is that Hamas still has, there are estimates, they kind of vary, but estimate at least 20,000 more operatives. And they're all hiding in the civilian areas where all the civilians are. In Gaza City, in the Mawasi area, in Deir al-Balach. They're not engaged in fighting with the army. They're waiting for something. And there's also the factor of the hostages. So in order to try and defeat those Hamas operatives in those areas, it will pose a risk to the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas and to Palestinian civilians who are all sheltering in those areas. So when we talk about the army sending in 5 divisions into Gaza to defeat Hamas, they weren't actually going in really to defeat Hamas because they're not really fighting Hamas because they're all hiding in the civilian areas. They are defeating the small cells. There are still obviously Hamas operatives that are engaged in fighting with the army. Of course, 48 soldiers were killed in the past few months. But the bulk of Hamas's forces are not engaged in fighting. And that's another big sort of problem with this operation is the goal was defeating Hamas, but Israel didn't go to defeat Hamas. It went to try and pressure them into a hostage deal. And that's what the army was trying to tell reporters as well, that the operation was intended to try and get Hamas back to the negotiation table. And that's sort of a question is this next operation, if Netanyahu orders it to take control of all of Gaza, is that also just an attempt to pressure Hamas back into a deal? Or is Israel really going to go in and defeat Hamas in those areas that it hasn't been in before, at the risk of the hostages and also risking the lives of Palestinian civilians residing in those areas?
Right. In the meantime, we've been talking about this for several months. We've heard that the IDF is essentially fighting infrastructure, blowing up tunnel networks, destroying buildings that are booby-trapped, et cetera, et cetera. But tell me, Manny, is it 25% of the Strip that the IDF has never been in before, or has the IDF operated in this last 25% and just gone in and out in some kind of raid-like manner?
In most of the 25%, the army has not been in before. That's correct. The section it has been in before is in Gaza City, the west of Gaza City, sort of basically the areas near the sea. The army was there at the beginning of the war. It's been in there a few times. There's been a few small raids there, but that's about it. In Deir al-Balah and Nuseirat and the Mawasi area, the army hasn't touched it. Nuseirat, there's one exception, the hostage rescue last summer, where troops went in to rescue 4 hostages and get out, but not any ground maneuvers in those areas. It is areas where the army has not been in before, and I'm not sure when they will because of all the risks that come with it.
Right. Okay, let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter, Emanuel Fabian. So as you noted, one of the main goals of Gideon's Chariots was to prevent Hamas from taking over humanitarian aid entering the Strip. But according to United Nations statistics, almost 9 out of every 10 UN trucks that entered Gaza with humanitarian aid over the last several months were looted either by hungry Gazans or by armed groups before reaching their destination. And one of the ways that Israel is trying to circumvent this is that Israel is gradually permitting the entry of goods into the Gaza Strip for the private sector for sale. And we're hearing actually that most of the food that residents of Gaza are obtaining is actually through purchase, not through these aid sites or through aid distribution. So do you, Manny, I mean, we're not a prophet here, but do you feel like adding this other channel for supplies could actually eliminate the looting of the aid trucks?
I don't think so, to be honest. I don't think so. I think I noted this in the story we put up, that in the past, Kogat, the defense ministry body that's responsible for the entry of aid into Gaza, warned, it wasn't very long ago, it was in November, and they said that the entry of goods into the private sector is being exploited by Hamas, and they're using it for economic and military buildup. And that's why they stopped the private sector entry of goods in October 2024 after a few months. And now they're resuming it because of all the international pressure on Israel to basically increase the flow of aid into Gaza. Will this stop the looting? I don't think so. The UN trucks are always looted. In fact, even according to Kogat officials that I've spoken to, the looting is mostly done by hungry Gazans, by mobs of Palestinians, not by Hamas. And sometimes there are armed gangs that take control of it, but it's mainly just civilians who try to take control of the trucks before they reach the distribution sites. I'm not a strategist here, but I think probably the best solution to stop this is to just increase the flow of aid even more. Have so many trucks go in, and then people won't be trying to loot every truck that comes in because there won't be a limited supply of aid. If there's enough aid to reach everybody, then that would probably solve the issue. But Israel is going through with this, the GHF sites, the distribution centers where there's free aid, but of course, trying to get to that free aid has according to the reports we're seeing from Gaza, is very dangerous. There's been reports of hundreds killed near the aid sites. We've seen footage of sort of the chaos that takes place at the aid sites themselves. We've also seen with these mobs that try to take control of the trucks going into Gaza, that civilians have been killed in trampling or being run over by the trucks, or even gunfire within the crowds, according to the army. It's not safe. And that's why, of course, many civilians go for the market to try and purchase from the market, which is much safer. So allowing more into the commercial sector is good, but I think it needs to be increased quite a lot more for it to make a big difference.
You were at the Kerem Shalom crossing several weeks ago, and you saw just stockpiles of aid waiting to be distributed. Is that still the case?
There are still, it's not as much as there was a couple of weeks ago. There's still, I think, according to statistics I saw from Kogat this morning, around 300 trucks worth of aid waiting at Kerem Shalom to be collected. It was nearly 1,000 a couple of weeks ago. So the UN has increased its operations and is collecting and distributing the aid. But of course, as it says, most of it is looted on the way.
Tell us a little bit about the airdrops over the past week.
So we've seen around 700, I think, pallets of aid been airdropped into Gaza in the past week or so by various countries, including Israel. But the aid that Israel or the Israeli Air Force airdropped was not supplied by Israel, but by international groups. Most of these airdrops were led by Jordan and the UAE. We've also seen European countries get involved. Germany, Belgium, France, also Canada did an airdrop this week for the first time. Egypt as well, I forgot to mention them. But the pallets of aid, per day they're airdropping normally around 100, which is around 100 tons. But if you do the math, that really only ends up to around maybe 7 or 8 trucks worth of aid. And the amount of trucks entering Gaza, the UN says that it needs 650 or so trucks of aid to enter Gaza each day to supply the needs of the population. The airdrops are really a drop in the bucket there.
Let's turn to a completely different matter. And after completing 7 months of basic and advanced training, the first company of troops from the IDF's new Haredi brigade, which is known as the Hasmonean Brigade, is set to receive their berets in a ceremony this morning. In fact, they may have already received them, right, Manny? So it's a new signature dark blue beret. Tell us about these ultra-Orthodox soldiers who just completed a march to the Western Wall in Jerusalem.
So the Hasmonean Brigade, or Hashmonaim as it's known in Hebrew, this is a new part of the army's plans to integrate ultra-Orthodox soldiers into army service, of course, amid all this difficulty with trying to get Haredim to enlist. The army has had these other options in the past. There's Netzach Yehuda in the Kfir Brigade. There's all these other options. But Hashmonaim was set to be its own individual brigade with much, I would say, more strict rules regarding sort of the level of religiousness. Soldiers there have to have what is known as a kosher phone, which basically don't have any apps on them, just only phone calls and some basic functions. On Saturdays, on the Shabbat, the soldiers change into Shabbat clothes, a white shirt, and whatever else they normally wear at home. So it's quite a lot more strict, and the level of kashrut for the food is also more strict, as far as I understand. So this began in January, so 7 months later now, after basic training and advanced training. The first company of troops have now completed their training. They held this march from the outskirts of Jerusalem to the Western Wall overnight. And then a ceremony was held this morning for them to receive their berets. And like you mentioned, it's going to be a sort of a dark blue, close to the Navy's beret, as far as I understand, maybe a little bit darker than that. And meanwhile, there's more troops that are currently in training in the Hashmonaim Brigade. Of course, it's a brigade, but they only have a company right now of soldiers. It will take time for this brigade to actually fill out its ranks. They estimate a few years, because normally a brigade has 4 battalions in it, and we're talking about just a company of 50 troops right now. So it will take time, but the army is hoping that within the coming years, and if more ultra-Orthodox soldiers enlist into the army, then they'll be sent here, and then the army will have a full brigade of thousands of troops who all come from the ultra-Orthodox community. Where
are they meant to be deployed? What kind of combat training do they have?
They have the same combat training that any other infantry brigade has. We don't know whether they will be deployed yet. I do know that the Hashmonaim Brigade also has a reserve company of soldiers who were previously trained, and they put them into this brigade. So those reservists were actually deployed to Gaza for an operation a couple months ago in the Bet Hanun area. They were there for a few weeks. So it's possible that in the future that this brigade will also be deployed to Gaza. But they receive the same training as any other infantry do, the same as Nachal and Givati and Kfir and the paratroopers and all the others.
Okay, so if that's the case, then when they're deployed into Gaza, for example, they will not be pulled out on Shabbat. They will have to remain in on Shabbat, I would assume?
Yeah, they would have to. They have the same obligations as everyone else. I mean, they're still soldiers. The army's just made adjustments for their religious lifestyle, such as mandatory attendance at prayers in the morning. There's, in the other units, they have the prayers, but they don't force everyone to go. And here it's mandatory. If you don't, you'll be kicked out and sent to another unit. So it's very strict and enforced there, but the things that the soldiers need to do is going to be the same as anyone else.
Okay, so right now we're talking about 50 young men out of the some 80,000 in the pool of the ultra-Orthodox society that are eligible for conscription. And that's fantastic. But I was wondering what was happening with the idea. There was an idea floated a while ago about having some kind of yeshiva type program in the Jordan Valley to try and attract more ultra-Orthodox conscripts.
There were talks about this, I think, under the previous chief of staff. The army is now in the midst of establishing, or it's already deployed this new regional division on the Jordan border. And as far as I understand, it will be staffed right now by the existing units on the Jordan border and these other reservist units based on volunteers, soldiers who have been released from reserve duty and now want to come back. I don't think right now there's any plans for the Haredi units to serve there, but it's possible in the future that, you know, if the army sees that it's getting a much sort of larger amounts of Haredim joining the army, then it may indeed go through with this plan. But right now, the Hasmonean Brigade is where they want to send them.
And one final question about these Hasmonean troops. Again, just 50, but thank God it's 50, right? They are volunteers, meaning they voluntarily went to Bakum, to the conscription center, or they were drafted like everyone else and just completed the process as one would.
Right now, we're at a point where there's no sort of volunteering anymore for these soldiers. It's all conscription. The army's sent out, you know, of the pool of the 80,000 Haredim who are eligible for military service who haven't drafted, the army sent them all draft orders already. There's no asking them anymore. They've all received draft orders, and those who don't will potentially face sanctions, but enforcing them is another story. So these soldiers received draft orders and they drafted. Of course, there's ways of trying to get out of it, but they did go through with it. And I think it's also sort of missed in a lot of the reporting is the fact that any Israeli who turns 16 and a half now receives a draft order, whether they're Haredi or not. In the past, Israel, well, the army didn't send ultra-Orthodox teenagers these first initial draft orders when they turn 16 and a half. They do nowadays. So in a year, we will see not just 80,000 who are eligible but not enlisted. We'll just see teenagers having to show up at the Bakum, at the enlistment center, to begin their process of joining the army.
To show up or not show up, as the case may be. Right, Manning?
If they don't show up, then they could be arrested, yes.
They could be, but okay. In any case, we'll end this conversation here. Thank you so much, Manny, for all of your insights today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Ben Wallach. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.